Hello and welcome to another episode of Cutting Edge, a new show created by Sheffield Hallam students for Sheffield Live. My name is Josh Chapman.
And I'm Ellie Colton. Coming up on today's programme, musicians say that European tours could be cancelled when Britain leaves the EU.
And the RSPCA fears a record number of animals will be abandoned after being given as Christmas presents. Our top story today, and touring around Europe could become even harder for bands from the UK after we leave the EU.
Our reporter Tom Barton went down to the studio with Sheffield band Jet Ski to find out more about the possible effects of Brexit on small UK artists.
The last too easy for you to say, sir?
Sheffield band Jet Ski are back in the studio to record their new single. They're preparing to take this song and others on tour around Europe this year, but that's looking increasingly difficult. The Conservative Party win back in December means that we're almost certainly going to be leaving the European Union. Key music industry figures say that artists from the UK will struggle to make touring in the EU viable after we exit. Musicians may face extra complications with travel documents, border checks, and the transportation and sale of merchandise. All this will mean extra costs for small bands who make little to no money from their recorded music.
So Brexit's going to affect us and a bunch of other bands of our sort of size, just on the basis that a lot of people make a lot of money out of European touring and touring in the US as well, and being able to take merchandise over there and sell it, which then funds stuff like studio time and funds stuff like music videos and all the other things about being a band. I think that's like an important thing to bands, because we don't really make a lot of money out of people just listening to the music anymore. Streaming sites have definitely killed off the amount of money you can earn from your music. So being able to take a van full of merch across the rest of the world allows you to fund all this sort of stuff.
Artists are not the only people affected by the Brexit deal. It could also affect tour managers who rely on visas to work abroad and, just like artists, operate on a tiny profit margin.
Because we're going to have to spend money on a visa to be able to work over there, and then obviously that comes out of any money that we make over there, and getting merch over and stuff is obviously going to cost more money.
As Joe Strummer said, the future is unwritten, and it is down to Boris Johnson and the Conservative government to ensure that the UK music industry can continue to thrive overseas. This is Tom Barton for Cutting Edge.
Now, you saw there Charles from the band Jet Ski, and he joins us in the studio now. Charles, first of all, in an ideal world, what needs to happen to ensure that bands that are touring in Europe, that it's worthwhile for them?
Well, in an ideal world, I think that there needs to be things taken into consideration by the EU about foreign bands, particularly British bands, and going over there and making their money in the way that they can, avoiding things like tariffs and having to declare goods for merchandise and all those sort of things.
And do you think it's going to cost you more to tour abroad now?
There's a bunch of things that might cause that. You know, the tariffs that I've just mentioned is one of those, and having to pay a tax on your earnings while you're over there. Another thing is working visas. If you're there for a certain amount of time and you're earning a certain amount of money there, you might have to apply for a working visa, which, if you look at anywhere else in the world you have to apply a visa to work for, can be extremely expensive. And
there's potentially going to be border checks as you go from one country to another. How is that going to affect you?
Merchandising is the big one. Merchandise up until this point hasn't been something that you had to declare when travelling between different countries, as long as you're inside the EU. But that is looking to change pretty soon. And you know, merchandise is a big way that people make money. You don't make a whole lot of money off streaming sites and all that stuff nowadays. So merchandising is going to be a big hit.
And is that going to slow you up personally? You know, being checked as a band?
Possibly, very possibly. I think that merchandising is one way that bands grow in like a modern age, and it's kind of like a free billboard. You know, people buy your T-shirt and then they wear it out, and especially in foreign countries where the band isn't from, that's a real way to, you know, grow engagement, and you know, that's something that's going to have some roadblocks in its way.
And did you think that before the Brexit referendum, bands really understood that this could all be a reality for them?
I think you saw some people clicking on quite early. A lot of bands took like a hard public stance on the matter because they knew what would happen if we were to leave the EU and leave it in a hard way. So a lot of people clicked on fairly early. Some people are just realising now, which is a little bit worse. People haven't made preparations for this, and you know it's livelihood at the end of the day. It's a lot of people, you know, it seems all glitz and glam, but that's for the Ed Sheerans of the world, and then there's people like us who, you know, are just trying to make their money where they can, and I think that's going to be a thing of the past if it works out as looking to.
And you mentioned there the fact that people like Ed Sheeran probably won't be too affected by this, but do people not realise how smaller bands like yourself could be affected?
I think it's weird. People don't consider that every big band's been a small band, and that if it wasn't for the freedom of movement that we have, the rest of the world wouldn't know about the amazing music that we have here. It's what we're known for all over. The biggest bands in the world have come from here, and I think we're going to stunt that growth.
Well, thank you, Charles. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
The rates of homelessness in Sheffield are at their highest since 2010, with a startling amount of children now living in poverty in the city.
Our reporter Seamus Toll went to find out what is being done to combat the issue.
A cold winter for the people of Sheffield, but even colder for those living in these conditions on the streets. There are many charities aimed at helping these homeless, but many slip through the system and remain alone on the streets. In the UK, homelessness is at an all-time high, with places like South Yorkshire increasing by 19% since 2010, making it the third largest area in the country across all ages. This means that 40,000 children in Sheffield alone are living in poverty. I spoke to the Roundabout Hostel to find out how children are affected by homelessness.
So we support young people from 16 to 21 with independent living skills, sort of to be able to gain these sort of skills to eventually move on independently. Homelessness can include young people that surf-surfing, are in temporary accommodation like ourselves, so it is sort of a range of things.
Louise Haigh, speaking in the election results a few months ago in Sheffield, chose to highlight the issue of homelessness in her acceptance speech.
Countries where in the world food banks shouldn't exist. Our towns and cities shouldn't be full of homeless people. People shouldn't be struggling on 0-hour contracts with poverty pay. But people have lost hope that things can be any other way. That politics can change these things for the better, and that another path for this country is possible.
It could be a while before a real change becomes apparent. Seamus Toll reporting for Cutting Edge.
And now for more news from around Sheffield and South Yorkshire, and it is estimated that up to £110 million of insurance money will be paid out to flood victims following the early November floods. The Association of British Insurers said just over 4,000 flood claims had been received already. At least £680,000 has been paid out so far in rehousing the areas worst hit by the floods.
And Sheffield's Crucible Theatre is set to undergo refurbishment costing more than £600,000. More than half of the revamp will be funded by Arts Council England alongside a fundraising campaign created by the Crucible. And the venue will receive an upgrade in technical equipment as well as renovating its front of house and cafe.
Sheffield City Council has announced that it has been successful in the first round of applications to secure up to £25 million of funding.
Government money is up for grabs to breathe new life into Sheffield's High Street, with the Council and the University of Sheffield working together to create a bid in time for spring 2020.
Next tonight, and Sheffield Skills Academy have opened up free courses for young people with difficult backgrounds.
They aim to encourage people to get into work through manual labour. Our reporter Jack Thompson went to find out more.
Sheffield Skills Academy has been accepting applications since August 2019. Now, there are a number of people with troubled backgrounds working to achieve a qualification in multi-trade. The company provides a 3-week programme where the applicants can achieve a CSCS card, which allows them to work on construction sites, followed by an optional 7-week course to achieve a Level 1 diploma in multi-trade. With this diploma, the individual can go on to choose a speciality within multi-trade, such as joinery, bricklaying or painting and decorating. The service is free of charge due to a new set of contracts with the government, allowing funding from major holders. This opened up the company's opportunity to work alongside community groups and the probation service to get people back on their feet.
It's those that are not in employment. They can be from various forms, from the job centres. We also work a lot with the community groups and the probation service. So those that have been in care and are coming out and wanting to find their way in the employed community.
Individuals from around Sheffield that have had a difficult background are now able to pick up a qualification in something like painting and decorating and enjoy the courses the company has to offer.
This is my second week. Everyone's really nice, kind. Get cups of tea.
A development like Sheffield Skills Academy gives hope to people who believe they are lost or feel like they can't get back into society. The probation services, as well as other community groups, are working closely with Sheffield Skills Academy, who are due to receive many more students in 2020. If we continue to see organisations like this, people who have lost their way can rebuild their future by giving back to the society they feel lost without. This is Jack Thompson for Cutting Edge.
Now think back to the election in December. It was a result that surprised everyone.
But what is it like for those people who count the thousands of votes? I went behind the scenes at the English Institute of Sport to get an inside look. They're not the kind of boxes you usually see at Christmas time, but Boris Johnson gave the country an early Christmas present when he called a December general election. The Conservative leader wanted to increase his party's majority in order to get key Brexit bills and other legislation through Parliament, and he got his wish. But whose job was it to count all those votes? Well, the job fell to around 300 counters and election staff at the English Institute of Sport in Attercliffe, who were counting the votes in bundles of 25 from the 6 constituencies and 247 polling stations in Sheffield. One of those counters was Chris Bromley, and he's certainly no stranger to the late nights and the early mornings.
We count the postal votes, that's the first thing we do in the evening. So come 10 o'clock, that's the first thing we count. That's all done and dusted, and then we get the actual ballot boxes that come in from all the districts, from all the church halls and all the little schools where everybody's gone to do the voting, and then we get them in, and so we've just counted those.
It's estimated that close to 1,000 people were involved in the election, from staff in the city's polling stations to the people at the EIS, and the man in charge of running the whole operation was the council's returning officer, John Mothersole.
It's a massive operation, as you can see behind me. It's an operation that's gone on for 5 weeks and all through the day. So actually my job today is actually not to get in the way, to make sure everything looks like it's going okay, to make sure proper process is followed, to make sure the results are declared properly. Because if the results are declared wrongly, then actually we're in a spot of bother.
Thankfully for him, though, the results were announced without a hitch, apart from Lord Mayor Tony Downing with a slight mishap.
Green Party, 1,179.
But what did the day after entail for the pair? Their answers were very different.
Go home, in theory to get some sleep, but I'll be too wired. I've had too much coffee, I'll have too much adrenaline from this. I'll probably sit, sadly, and watch an election programme at home.
Tomorrow will entail me stopping in bed while about dinner time, so that's that, and I've got a day off work, so that's my day sorted. I'm putting the Christmas tree up as well.
After 6 results announcements, the night was over for another 5 years. Or will it be before? This is Josh Chapman for Cutting Edge.
We are now joined in the studio by BBC Radio Sheffield reporter Rob Rose, who covered the election in Sheffield. So, Rob, welcome to the show.
Hello.
What was it like reporting on the election?
Well, it's the first time I've done an election coverage, and I'll start by saying it was an absolute honour and a privilege to do it. But it was also really, really interesting because when I did my research, I looked back at the Chesterfield patch, which was the area I covered, and Toby Perkins, who was the Labour MP, looked like he was going to win. If you look back at the last 2 elections, he'd grown his majority. So I'd gone with a kind of wrongly expectation, thinking, well, this is just going to be a Labour retained seat, not really going to be hard work. And then, of course, at 10 o'clock, when the exit polls came out, and then the local exit poll for Chesterfield came out and said it's going to be really close, I was like, OK, this is going to be a tough one. So I was making sure I was interviewing all the candidates, chatting to people doing the count and trying to keep an ear across what was going on. So, yeah, in summary, it was one heck of an experience.
And do you think the BBC's coverage was good, both locally in terms of Radio Sheffield and nationally as well across the country?
I mean, I can't comment nationally because we always focus locally, but certainly from a Sheffield perspective, the amount of behind-the-scenes effort that goes into election coverage is ridiculous. I know there's a lot of press at the moment, especially in the newspapers, about, you know, BBC bias and stuff, but I can 100% say from a local level, there's just no chance that it can happen, because everything from our news bulletins, if we have a candidate who's standing in elections, it has to be logged and what the content was to make sure that that's then followed up further in the week or the day with the alternative candidate, to make sure that the impartiality and the balance is there. And of course on the night, making sure that I'd done my research so I could hold the candidates to account if they say anything. So the amount of effort that goes into it, I can 100% confidently say that BBC Radio Sheffield and the wider local regions definitely owned it. It was a big team effort. We were the ants on the ground feeding the big nest.
And you mentioned earlier on that it was your first time covering an election. What was it like being behind the scenes?
Scary was a start, and very nervous, but I'd made sure I'd done my research just to try and calm me down. I'm a person who likes to know what I'm doing, but on those kind of events you don't know what you're doing because the count could be delayed, there could be a recount, so it's about liaising with your producer. And I was lucky enough that Rob Dowell was the main producer at Radio Sheffield. Big shout out to him, because when you've got a voice in your ear that is soothing and calm, when you're on the ground and everything's happening, that's exactly what you need, because, you know, you dial into the studio and you're shouting down your microphone, right, you've got to come to me, got to come to me. And he's going, OK, we've heard you, we'll be there in a minute, and that's all you need. But yeah, I've got a special rig now. We've got these iPhones where you can broadcast to the studio. That was great fun. The only thing that really worried me was I had no 4G signal, so I had to stand in a really odd place in the hall. So I don't know who had done what we call a pre-rec, where you go and visit the location, but I think they had an O2 phone and I was on a E, so it didn't go very well. But we got through. We got through.
Well, thank you, Rob, for coming in today and for talking to us as well.
No problem, anytime.
And finally tonight, buying animals as Christmas presents has been a controversial topic for years now.
And the RSPCA in Sheffield were inundated with abandoned dogs after the festive season. I went along to find out how they cope.
A dog is for life, not just for Christmas. It's what we get told every year. But for dogs like Lucy, the reality is many owners cannot cope and abandon them after the festive season, meaning the RSPCA become inundated with rescue dogs. Lucy has been here for over a year now after her owners left her at the shelter with huge weight problems. I spoke to Gemma North, kennel team leader, about how dogs as presents impact the RSPCA.
I think the RSPCA as a whole and other charities always see an increase sort of like this time of year. It's usually more after Christmas, so sort of like the later on months, as people kind of realise the actual intake of animals and what goes into looking after an animal. It's not just a cute little puppy, it does grow into a huge dog.
For the dogs at the RSPCA waiting to be adopted, many have to be reared back to good health before leaving, like Lucy for example. But for many dogs, a good home is only a sleep away, as an average of 3 dogs will be adopted from this branch today. And for Springer Spaniels Oscar and Jessie, their brand new home has finally got them back to normality after being abandoned. Their owner, Martin Duffy, explains the responsibility of owning a rescue dog.
Harder because they come with a package, and sometimes you don't know how they've been treated. Sometimes they've been abused, especially at Christmas. And these dogs in particular had urine stains on the bottom of their legs, so you don't know what they've gone through. Someone's looked after them and trained them, because they were lovely with the ball, but when they first come to the house, they were urinating and pooing all over. So it's building up that trust, and they want to be your friend, and that's what makes rescue dogs even nicer.
The RSPCA do advise against getting a dog for Christmas, so think before you buy. Ellie Colton reporting for Cutting Edge.
Oh, those dogs were so cute, weren't they?
I know. Should we adopt one?
I think we should adopt them all, Josh.
Bring them all in the studio.
Why not? I'd love it. I'd love it.
Anyway, that is all we've got time for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. I've been Josh Chapman.
And I've been Ellie Colton. Goodbye for now.